In this part, we are going to see the working of the Congress in its initial years. The period between 1885 to 1905 is often regarded as the moderate phase of the Congress. The reason for this is the mild approach used by the early Congress leaders. They used petitions, speeches, and newspaper articles to convince the British through its logic. The moderate leaders believed that direct struggle for independence was still premature. First, we need to prepare the Indians through arousing the nationalist feelings by mobilizing public opinion on political and economic questions. For these 20 years from 1885 to 1905, the Congress met every year for a 3-day session. During these sessions, they discussed various political, economic, and social issues and passed resolutions. To understand the political demands made by the Congress, let's quickly see the political structure during that period. The Union government had Viceroy as the head, and the entire British territory was divided into provinces. The provinces had governors as the head. The Viceroy had 2 councils to aid him: an executive council for decision making and a legislative council to make laws. The executive council did not have Indian members until the Government of India Act 1909. What about the legislative council? By the 1861 Indian Councils Act, for the first time, Indian members were included in the Viceroy's Legislative Council. But these members were not elected, but rather nominated by the Viceroy. And the majority of the members in the Legislative Council were British officials. The problem with nomination was that only those people were nominated who were sure to be British loyalists. But the real demands of Indian people could only be conveyed through elected representatives. Besides, the functions of the Legislative Council were very limited. The members did not have the power of discussing the budget. Most of the power lied with the Viceroy and his Executive Council. So overall, we can say that the British government did not have adequate Indian representation. So the initial political demands of the Indian National Congress included reforms in the Legislative Council, both at the Union and the provinces. They demanded increase in the number of Indian members in the Legislative Councils. The Congress also demanded that the representatives in the council should be elected from local bodies, universities, and chambers of commerce. In response to these demands, the British government passed the Indian Councils Act 1992. Under this act, the number of Indian members in the Legislative Council was increased. Provisions were also made for indirect elections, but the official majority would still remain. The problem was that the act did not mention the term election. It instead said nomination by the Viceroy on the recommendation of chambers of commerce and provincial legislative councils. So in effect, even if a member was elected by local organizations, the Viceroy could still reject it. The Congress leaders did not find this satisfactory. They called this act as a hoax. So now the Congress started shifting towards a slightly aggressive plan. By the start of the 20th century, Congress put forth for the first time the demand for Swarajya or self-government. But please note that this demand for self-government was on the lines of self-governing British colonies like Australia and Canada. So this still was not a demand for complete independence, but rather that of being a dominion. The Swarajya demand was made in 1905 session under Gopal Krishna Gokhale and in 1906 under Dadabhai Nauroji. These were the political demands of the early Congress leaders. Now let's look at some of the administrative issues raised by the moderate Congress. The first was reforms in the Indian civil services. Indians were allowed in the service after the 1853 Act, but the exam was held in England. Due to this, the service was largely dominated by the British, and thus the administration remained racist against Indians. The British officers of the Indian civil service would draw fat salaries, thus causing drain of wealth from India to Britain. So the Congress called for Indianization of the ICS. They demanded simultaneous examinations in India and England. This would make the service more accessible to Indians and would thus reduce the racism in administration. Other demands included separation of judiciary from executive, trial by jury, Indianization of superior ranks in the army, welfare activities like primary education, health and medical facilities, irrigation, etc. The Congress also opposed the aggressive foreign policy against Burma and Afghanistan and the suppression of tribal people in the northwestern part of India. Now let's see the economic issues raised by the Congress leaders. On the economic front, the moderate Congress's demands were largely based on Dadabhai Nauroji's drain of wealth theory. Dadabhai Nauroji, in his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, exposed how the British had systematically subordinated the Indian economy. The Indian economy was transformed into a mere supplier of raw materials to Britain as a market for factory-made British goods and an investment arena for foreign capitalists. The Congress criticized the British government for ruining the traditional Indian industries and halting the growth of modern Indian industries. They opposed the foreign investments in Indian railways, plantations, and industries. They demanded that Indian economy should be developed with Indian indigenous capital. In order to promote Indian goods, the early nationalists like Lokmanya Tilak popularized the ideas of Swadeshi and boycott. The Congress even called for abolition of salt tax. Through such demands by Congress, there was a growing awareness among Indian people about the economic exploitation done by the British. The early Congress leaders tried to shape the opinion of people. They not only mobilized public opinion in India, but they also traveled to England to make the people in England aware of the British policies in India. In 1889, a committee of the Congress was set up in England. A journal called India began to be published in England. In 1893, Sir William Wedderburn and W.S. Kane set up the Indian Parliamentary Committee in the British Parliament to agitate for political reforms in India. But despite these small achievements, some members of the Congress were not happy with the progress made by the Congress. They wanted faster, concrete results. The members who believed in pure constitutional agitation were called as moderates, and the members who wanted faster results were called as extremists. After conflicts within the Congress, the extremists were eventually expelled from the Congress at the famous Surat session of 1907. In the next video, we shall see what led to the moderates versus extremists controversy.